Now, you can tell there's a general election coming up in the near future, can't you? Today, Labour is boasting about being the party of economic growth, reporting a surge in business interest at this year's annual conference. Yeah, according to internal analysis, the party's expected to make up to £500,000 from business sponsorship this year, up from $200,000 in 2022. Well, we're joined now by Chair of the Labour Party, Anneliese Dodds. And a very good morning to you. First of all, the resignation letter of Nadine Dorries. Has she almost, or do you feel she's almost handed the Labour Party the next election?
Good morning. Well, I certainly think that she's taken a very long time to decide to resign, and people living in her constituency are really sick of this situation where they've not had proper representation. But I do think, although I disagree with Nadine Dorries on many things, when she says that we currently have a zombie parliament, and when she asks what Rishi Sunak stands for and what he's achieved, I think many people will be saying they don't understand either. And I think this is incredibly damaging when, as we know, our country's in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We have a crisis in our NHS, crisis of crime on our streets, and yet we seem to have a zombie government that just can't get a grip. So we do need to see a change, and obviously Labour's in pole position, hoping that we will see a Labour MP elected in that constituency. Oh, I'll tell you what, though, that's a bit difficult, isn't it, saying you don't know what the Prime Minister stands for? A lot of people would say that about Rishi Sunak. He's done more U-turns than you can count, including now, so we're told, on the wealth tax. Rachel Reeves saying there's going to be no form of wealth tax if Labour come to government. Well, that's an absolute U-turn. With respect, I'm afraid we've been really clear about that for a very long time indeed, and Labour's explicit. We've got to be clear about those questions of how we'll pay for the changes that we want to make, and some of that will involve difficult choices. We've been clear that we would scrap those tax breaks for private schools. We'd use that money to ensure every child had an excellent school. We'd also scrap the non-dom tax exemption. We believe that if you live in our country, you should pay tax in our country, and we'd use that tax money to actually pay for the NHS staff boost that we need to see, and for breakfast clubs for every primary school child. So we would take difficult choices, but we've been really upfront and explicit about what those choices are. We've not seen that upfront approach, I'm afraid, from the Conservatives, and we have seen just drifting on difficult issues for our country when a government should be getting a grip on them and actually facing up to those challenges and opportunities. Nadine Dorries takes a swipe at the Labour Party in her letter, though. She says to Rishi Sunak, it is a fact that there is no affection for Keir Starmer out on the doorstep. He does not have the winning X-factor qualities of a Thatcher, a Blair or a Boris Johnson. And then she says, and sadly, Prime Minister, neither do you. I mean, is that true? On the doorstep, when you're doing your campaigning, do people want to vote Labour, or is it just that they don't believe in the Conservatives anymore? People do want to vote Labour, in my experience, and there's a huge amount of support for Keir Starmer. I mean, people do not want to have a politician who's fixated on reality TV shows. They want to have politicians who are actually focused on the challenges facing our country, and people recognise that in Keir. He's someone who has not been a politician for all of his life. He has run a very large organisation before. He's delivered before. He's delivered particularly when it comes to ensuring the safety of women and girls when he worked in criminal justice. He's someone who's got that track record of delivery, and people recognise that, and they recognise that he's straight with them and that he's open and upfront. And in particular, they recognise that Keir has said we're not going to be able, if Labour is elected, to fix everything overnight. He's been very upfront and honest about that, and I think that's very different, again, to the kind of, sticking plaster, soundbite related politics that we've seen over the last 13 years with Conservative-led governments. But he does change his mind a lot. I mean, we can't escape from the fact that there have been there's been a lot of reversing going on from what he's promised one minute to what he's promising the next. That must be frustrating. I mean, as someone who's been a politician, as you have been for, a considerable amount of time, really, and with the experience you have, that must be very frustrating, mustn't it? Well, I don't recognise that. Actually, Keir's always been clear that he's absolutely focused on the needs of working people. He understands that inside out. Obviously, with his family history, he's someone who really wants to make sure that our country is one that works for working people. And he's been absolutely resolute on that. We have seen, when it comes to particularly economic questions, our country moving in the wrong direction, pretty spectacularly in the wrong direction over the last few months, particularly with that disastrous mini budget that we had last November. That means the fiscal situation will be very difficult, that situation of the public finances, the money that government has to spend. And actually, both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have been really clear about this. We're not going to make promises that we can't deliver. We've seen the harm that causes, especially last November, but with other aspects of Conservative policy as well. Labour's very different. We're not going to promise what we can't deliver. That's the difference between Labour and the Conservatives.
I mean, there's no doubt at the moment one feels that we are almost in electioneering mode. And today you announced that Labour's back in business because the business attendance at the annual conference is soaring. Are you on a business charm offensive?
Well, actually, what we've seen is a genuine desire to engage with Labour. And we've been really clear. We want to make sure we've got that partnership with business, working hand in hand with business. And that's certainly been the case with our Green Prosperity Plan. For example, we've got a shared agenda to drive economic growth in our country. We've seen really sluggish growth over the last 13 years. That's had a really negative impact on people's wages, on living standards. And business wants to change that, just as Labour want to change it too. So we're determined to work in partnership with business, also with, of course, trade unions, with local communities, to really seize those opportunities for the future. Because we're losing a lot of global races at the moment when our country actually has got the skills, it's got the knowledge, the expertise, it's got the natural resources to make best use of them. But under a Conservative government, we've been held back.
Look, I hate to throw this at you. Well, I don't hate to do it, but it's worth, But this is a list, and I can't go through all the details because we haven't got enough time. But this is a list from The Guardian, right, which obviously is a Labour-supporting paper, of Keir Starmer's U-turns. Abolish tuition fees, the Green Prosperity Plan, common ownership, raising income tax for the highest owners, defending migrants' rights, tech companies' tax raid, ending universal credit, and the Rosebank oil and gas field. They're significant U-turns that even The Guardian is highlighting. You can't on this programme say, well, you don't recognise the fact that he performs a lot of U-turns and people don't know what he stands for.
Well, I have to say that I would dispute a lot of the claims about that list that you just mentioned. I mean, if you look at the Green Prosperity Plan, for example, we're absolutely determined to put that plan into place. What we've been clear about, and what we will always be clear about with the British public, is that we are in a difficult set of financial circumstances as a country. Now, that's not been of Labour's making, that's been of the Conservative government's making. They've made our economic situation worse than that of many other countries. We're still the only G7 country whose economy is smaller now than it was before the COVID crisis. Now, because of that, because we've not seen that economic growth coming back, of course, we've got to take difficult choices, and we're not going to be able to change things overnight. It doesn't mean that we don't want to see change, and we have been explicit. We will implement that Green Prosperity Plan, but we're not going to be able to do it quite as quickly as we initially announced. Why? Because of that financial situation that's been created by the Conservatives. And we're never going to make commitments that we can't deliver. As I say, we've seen the harm from that, particularly last November under the Conservatives. That harm has led to, in many cases, £1,000 extra being shoved onto people's mortgages. Now, Labour will never do that to people. We will always be upfront about the economic choices that we're making, and Keir Starmer always has been. So is Rachel Reeves. That's quite right.
Are we almost out of time?
I think we are.
So,
it's really good to talk to you, though.
Final point, though, Anneliese, because you always come across as a very calm and measured lady. Have you ever let rip in a resignation letter or stormed out on an old boss or something?
Oh, goodness, what a question. Well, it's kind of you to say that I always appear calm. I'm not sure if my kids would always say that question. Have I ever let rip? I don't think so, but I suppose in that time-honoured phrase, revenge is a dish that is best served cold, I think. However, I think that dignity tends to be the best approach in these circumstances, often, rather than anger, I would say.
Do you sympathise at all with Nadine Dorries? What do you actually think of anyone writing a letter like this? 3 pages long, very personal criticism. What do you think?
Well, I suppose on the one hand, clearly she's expressing her own frustration with the situation. But I have to say, for people on the ground, and, I have been talking with people in Mid-Bedfordshire, as you would expect. Obviously, we selected our great candidate, Alistair Strathern, some time ago. So I have been talking with people on the doorstep. And I think they'll be pretty frustrated by this, to be honest. They want to have an MP who wants to be an MP. They want to have an MP who's really focused on them, who'll take up their issues, who's focused on things like the mortgage crisis, big issue in Mid-Bed, lots and lots of owner-occupiers there, people, particularly first-time buyers, just getting their first step on the ladder and really struggling. And I think they really would want to see more of a focus on their concerns, rather than how a politician might feel about what's happened. Really, there should be that focus on ordinary people and working people's concerns, frankly, not politicians.
Yes, ordinary people, absolutely, which is why I'm going to organise a sit-down exclusive with your children, Anneliese Dodds, to
find out what they really think.
To see what it's like when you let rip, as I'm sure you do on occasion. Really good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.